Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Our scripture reading for today is from the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verses 1 through 7. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
Good morning. Zach, you're up here with us 3 weeks in a row?
Either them trying to give me a great opportunity or do a little bit less work. I haven't decided which one yet.
Well, I was going to tell you how much I enjoyed you up here, but on that note, as Dave said, we're starting a new series, Generation to Generation, and we'll be spending some time in the Old Testament, and today we're going to be talking about Abraham. And as I was thinking about how the Bible starts, it reminded me of the musical The Sound of Music and how it opens with this beautiful wide-angle view of the Austrian Alps, right? And then as the camera zooms in, you get a glimpse of this small figure, and the camera keeps zooming in until you finally see this lady. She's got her arms out, she's singing, and she's walking. And I thought, this is kind of how the Bible starts, right? We're at this big view, this 30,000-foot view with the story of creation. And then we move straight into the flood and a new creation. And then we move into this genealogy of Noah and his sons, but we don't have a lot of detail about these people. And then we get to Genesis 12. And all of a sudden we get this close-up view of this man, Abram. And this is the very first time Abram is even mentioned is at the end of chapter 11. He's part of the genealogy. And what we learn is that his wife's name is Sarai and that they have no children. And then we get to Genesis 12. And God says, the Lord had said to Abram. And we meet him. And he's one of the most important people in the Bible. He's one of the most important figures in our faith. And from that moment on, the story of this man and his descendants, it fills the frame. It fills our story even today. So all of creation in this moment is moving towards the history of this one man, this one people, and it's all because of one promise God is about to make. And so we know that the name Abram means exalted father, except at this point in his life, he is not a father at all. And we have really no evidence or reason why God should call this man, of all people, to make an incredible promise to, a promise that he's going to give him a whole nation. And he is not, at this time, the father of faith. In fact, at the beginning of his life, we see him growing his faith. And he doesn't start out this spiritual giant that we read about in the Bible or read more about his tremendous faith in Hebrews. But in fact, God seems to be making a point at the beginning of showing us his failures. I think for me, I can relate. We all know that we all have our own failures, and it's kind of comforting to know that we see this in the giants of the Bible, right, in their faith. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a deeper look at this story. A lot of us know the story of Father Abraham from the familiar nursery rhyme. Father Abraham has many sons, and many sons as Father Abraham. So that's such a well-known song that you've probably heard it, and it definitely zeroes in on the idea of Abraham as a father to a nation. But what it misses is what that nation is there for, what it's supposed to do, what its purpose and calling is. In the text that we read and in the further calls of Abraham, he's called 3 different times, we learn that that nation is supposed to be God's tool for creating a world of order out of a world of chaos. We learn that it is that Abraham and his descendants are called to a life of service. So this calling that Abraham has is complicated a little bit by his context. One thing that clues us into that is by reading the book of Genesis a little bit differently. It's not an anthology of individual stories, but rather it's one narrative that is all pointing in one direction. This was pointed out to me in a book called Genesis for Normal People by Pete Enns and Jared Bias. And in this book, they illustrate how all of these stories leading up to Abraham are leading to this kind of chaotic world we find Abraham in. So first you have Adam and Eve, starts orderly in the garden, and then Eve tries to take control for herself. And that leads Adam and Eve to being shunned from the garden, and it leads to a world of chaos. Then you have Cain and Abel, which starts nice and ordered, with Cain and Abel both making offerings to God, but then, because of jealousy, it leads to conflict, and again, chaos. And then after that, we have the flood story, which is kind of the opposite. It starts in a chaotic world that ends in that new creation that Ashlea was talking about, but it's another Sunday school story that we skip parts of. The end of the Noah story ends with his sons finding him drunk in a tent, which leads to more conflict and more chaos. And this all leads to the moment where humanity is desperately trying to grab control one more time in the Tower of Babel, where they build up a tower trying to get all the way to heaven, only for God, who's already there with them, to look at the tower and then spread them out across the world, all speaking different languages. This is a point of complete chaos. And now, there's a lot of things in the Old Testament that feel ancient and strange and distant to me, but the idea of a chaotic world is not one of them. We live in a world that's pretty chaotic right now. We're bombarded by bad news or worse news that we don't know how to make heads or tails of. And so it is in the same world that Abraham was called to serve that we are called to serve. We hear this story and we focus on the descendants and the promised land, and we think that this is a story about being set apart and being retreated into the church, separate from the rest of the world. But what it's really saying is that we're being set apart not to be separate, but to serve the rest of the world. So that's one part that makes it a little more complicated. The second is along with Abraham's context, is his conduct. Abraham is not what I would call a role model. On 2 different occasions, he passes his wife off as his sister, and then at one point he has a child with the servant of his wife, and then abandons both of them. Abraham makes a lot of mistakes throughout his life. And in the same way, we all make mistakes. We all struggle with things throughout our existence. But that doesn't disqualify Abraham or ourselves from that call to service. Throughout all of those mistakes, all of those errors that Abraham made, God was faithful throughout all of it, continuing to call Abraham, remind him of the promise that he made and of that calling to service that he has. On the flip side of that, you have people who think that they've lived a good life. They haven't hurt anyone. They've done the right thing. They've checked the box of service, so they don't have to worry about it anymore. But that, again, doesn't set you aside from that call to service. So regardless of your context, your conduct, or your past, you are called to help God and make order out of a chaotic world.
So Zach's been talking about calling and how the concept of it can be hard, but I also think it can be simple, right? I think in our culture we make it more difficult because we hear the word calling and it's used a lot, and sometimes it's used in vague terms. People say, I have a calling to help people, or I feel called to ministry, right? Sometimes we miss God speaking to us or calling us because we're expecting a loud thunderbolt from the heavens, right? Or a booming voice or a burning bush. And that's not how God speaks to us. He speaks to us through whispers and nudges. Back in April, a few of us attended the Orange Conference, and one of the speakers that was there was Dr. Darius Daniels. In his book, Your Purpose is Calling, he defines calling as God's invitation for your participation and the reason for your creation. Let me say that again. God's invitation for your participation and the reason for your creation. And Darius goes on to say in the book, your calling is an invitation from your Creator. When you feel nudged or pulled toward a specific way, this is your Creator reaching out to show you how He made you, to show you why He made you. I think simply put, our calling is to live in to who God created us to be. It is God's invitation to participate in what He is already doing. I think we forget sometimes that God's already working in our world. He's working in our homes, in our communities. He's working in our schools and our workplaces. And we get busy and we don't take the time and we miss those nudges and those pullings from God. That's inviting us. It's Him inviting us to join Him in His efforts. And maybe your nudging is to feed the hungry. Maybe you have a desire to care for the well-being of children. Maybe you care about clothing children. Maybe it's fostering children. Whatever that might be, that desire that God's giving you, it's part of who you are. And I think sometimes we get our calling confused and we say our calling has to be our career when that's just not true. We can still have our career, but we can also have a calling that comes in the form of being a volunteer or serving as an internship, or maybe it's just being in the right place at the right time. For me, one of my deep desires is to help people, and of course, yes, ministry speaks to my career, but some of my greatest moments that I have known God is using me has just me being in the right place at the right time. I can remember I was on my way to church to work one morning, and I came upon an accident, and I knew God was saying you need to pull over, and I thought, oh man, I need to get there, but okay. So I pulled over, and I stopped to see if everybody was okay, and I was just going to get in my car once I knew everybody was okay, and I was going to go on, and then I saw this lady, and she was standing there, and she was visibly upset, shaking and crying, and so I went over to her, and I said, is there anything I can do? And she just kind of shook her head, and then she just grabbed my hand. And so we just stood there for a while as everything's happening around us, and I'm holding her hand, and eventually she looks at me and she says, you know, I was on my way to the hospital for surgery for breast cancer when this happened. And I had the opportunity to pray with her in that moment. And we started carrying on conversation, and she said, you know, I've walked away from the church. But in this moment, maybe it's time that I go back. And so had I not stopped, didn't do anything for me, but it was a reminder to her. God was pulling her back. And so I think God calls us in all sorts of ways, and we just have to be open to those. I think about people who have a passion for young people. Zach, you obviously come to mind. He gets really excited when he's on Sunday evenings, and he was so excited that programming was starting back for the fall, and I'm not sure he was so excited to get slimed a couple weeks ago, but you know, it's okay. But he has deep passion, and it's not just in hanging out with the youth, but it's in planning for the lessons and making sure they know that God is part of their life and that he's calling them too. So how did you get to your call in youth ministry?
Yeah, so to tell my call story, I got to go way back to the beginning. I've always grown up in the church. My dad was the music director at our churches growing up. So he was in charge of the choir and the praise team. And so I spent so many nights waiting outside the sanctuary for rehearsal to end so that we could go home. And so the church has always felt like a safe space for me. It's always felt comfortable. It's always felt welcome and warm. And so one of the things that's a big part of my call story is the summer camp that I would attend throughout middle and high school. This was a UMC camp in Florida, and I went every single summer. One time, when I was in like early high school, while I was at camp, I began to have a sense of maybe I want to be a pastor. Maybe I want to work for the church. And so I attended a workshop. I started to learn a little bit more about what does it mean to be a pastor in the United Methodist Church? How do you do that? And as I kept going, and then as I kept going on in life, left camp, it started to fade a little bit. I was getting into music. I was learning to play guitar. I was in the choir, began taking voice lessons, and I began to set my eyes on going into music business, being a producer, helping people make music. And so I went to school at Belmont University in Nashville to study music business. As I was there, I looked at the music business majors around me and saw that they had a particular kind of drive and aggressiveness and like desire to be in music business that made them really successful. And I knew that that wasn't me. I didn't have that in me. And so I was beginning to feel a little lost. I was like, I thought that this was where I was supposed to be, where God was calling me, and it just wasn't right. That summer, I went and spent 10 weeks working at camp. Every week I'd call my friend at the time, who's now my wife, Nikki, and we would talk about this. I was like, maybe I want to be a worship leader. Maybe Belmont's not the right place for me. And she was like, well, actually, they have this really great program called Religion in the Arts where you can study that, and that might lead you to be a great worship leader someday. Now, I'll tell you that that's Nikki pointing me towards my vocational call. She'll tell you that she was just trying to get me to stay at Belmont because she had a huge crush on me. I'll let you decide which of those stories is more true. It's probably a little bit of both of them. So that's what I did. I went back to Belmont, I changed my major, and I quickly learned that music was not going to be my minor, and I was beginning to doubt that worship ministry was where I was going, but I kept going on, and I got to the end of my time at school, and I went back to summer camp, and I knew I needed an internship, but I didn't know what to do. So I'd spent all this time, again, leading worship, spending time with middle schoolers and high schoolers, and I emailed my advisor. I was like, hey, is there anything that I can do maybe that leads me towards youth ministry or music ministry in any way? I was getting that call again for the third time. And he suggested, hey, why don't you check out this Methodist church on the south side of the city? They're looking for someone who can do those things. And as I started working there, at first I was doing way more music than I was youth. I was just kind of showing up on Sunday nights. But as it went on, I was spending more and more of my hours doing youth ministry, planning games, planning lessons and activities for the youth to do. And as I was coming towards the end of the internship, the youth director, Chris, pulled me aside and was like, hey, if you really are feeling a call towards youth ministry, there's this great program called CYMT that you should really look into. They train youth ministers by putting them in a church to work at, and they give you a master's degree along the way. It's a great deal. The only catch is they get to place you in whatever church they feel like you fit in. And so I lived in Nashville. The program was in Nashville. I was like, great. I won't even have to move. I can continue to live here. And then they sent me to Texas, which I didn't even know was an option when I signed up for it. The director says I'm the most surprised person he's ever told where I was being placed. So I went there. I continued to work in youth ministry, and I continue still to this day. That calling kind of came slowly. So my story might sound pretty typical for a youth minister, maybe not, but there are a few things I really want to point out about it. The first thing is that I didn't have a bright, shining voice from God. I didn't telling me what to do and where to go. On multiple occasions, I felt unsure of what I was going to do, and I never had a moment where it suddenly dawned on me what the right answer was. It was a process that was slow and informed by my experiences. I was guided by people on my path. Another aspect I want to highlight is that my vocation is complex. I'm not. Who here saw the Barbie movie? Anyone? Just me? There's a running joke in the Barbie movie that Ken, his job is just beach, not lifeguard, not surfer, just beach. It's a running gag throughout it. My vocational call is not just youth. There's a lot more to it than that. It includes things like I feel a call to make sure the church is using its power to help people and treat people justly based off experiences that I had with my dad working for the church. My experience with many of my friends coming out through middle school, high school, and college has led me to advocate for the church to be a more inclusive place for LGBTQ people. I point all of this out because you may not know if you have a strong calling, but you may not know if you have a strong calling. I'm always struck by pastors and ministers who talk about how everyone has a vocational calling, even if it's not to ministry, and then talk about their call to ministry. I still think that you have that vocational call in you, and it can be informed by some of the things that my call was. There's a great book I read about calling when I was in seminary, written by one of my professors. It's called Dream Care. It's by David White. And in this book, he talks about all of the things that lead to vocation: desire, joy, a sense of compassion or responsibility. And I'm going to go ahead and throw experience and gifts and talents in there too. He calls the youth directors reading this book to point out those things when they see them in the youth in their churches. This was done for me by my wife, Nikki, by my mentors, Chris and Eddie. It was invaluable to me in discovering my calling. So here's my challenge to you. I want you to spend some time in prayer and discernment this week. Think through your desire, your experience, your joy, your sense of compassion or responsibility, and prayerfully consider how God might be calling you into a life of service through those things. Then, because I'm the youth director, I have to get you to think outside of your life, maybe to the teenagers you know in your life. Think about the people you know, and think about their experiences, their joy, the things that lead them to compassion or responsibility. Think about those things in their life and maybe give them a call. Point out to them, hey, I see this in you. Maybe this is a calling that God is putting on your life towards a life of service, just like Abraham was called. So talking about vocation is something I do a lot in youth ministry because they're young. They're trying to figure out their purpose, their vocation, their direction. But it's something that I believe is true to the heart of all people, that we're all searching for that purpose, that call, that direction, no matter how old we are. And so I hope that you know that God is calling you right now.
Thank you, Zach, for sharing your story with us. And as Zach said, I think God is still calling each one of us, just as he called Abraham and he made a promise and a covenant. He also makes that with us today, and he made it when he sent Jesus to die for us on the cross.
Good morning. My name is Bob Drolley, and I am the Director of Congregational Care here at Zionsville UMC. Thank you for joining us today. We would love to get to know you more and spend some time with you. If you'd like to know more about our faith community, please visit our church website at zumc.org. There you'll find the many ministry opportunities we have to offer. If you need to contact one of our staff members, all of our contact information is at the bottom of each web page. You can also connect with us via social media throughout your week for daily inspiration and community. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under the username Zionsville UMC. Once again, thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope you have a wonderful week.